So I think it's important to really look at how you can begin to identify where you are operating out of the identity of the good girl or from this heavy people pleaser energy. Because to me, I really feel like they're one and the same. And most women who grew up with this good girl identity or operating from that place are now adults who experience high levels of stress and hypervigilance when faced with everyday situations. So, like disappointing somebody will trigger them, receiving compliments, setting boundaries, trying to just take care of themselves. And it's almost like these women who grew up with the patterning of the good girl, it's like there's this sense of being used or having to perform. And unless they're doing something, then they will not receive the love. They will not be liked. That's why so many women who carry this good girl energy are martyrs. They're heavy people pleasers because they believe that their love is contingent on what they do for others, not who they are being or how they're showing up in the world, right? Their value is contingent on what they do, or I'll even put it this way, what they don't do, right? Because when we're talking about being the good girl, it is about pleasing others, getting approval, over functioning, right? Over giving. And it's like this external approval means survival, means acceptance. Your basic sense of safety is linked to being liked by others, okay? And if you're putting all that energy outside of self, this is really going to set you up for low self esteem, poor boundaries, a deep sense of shame. So, in these dysfunctional families, the good girls are really praised for being invisible, staying quiet, and their willingness to tolerate poor treatment that completely, you know, goes past their own boundaries. Welcome back to the Shadow Priestess Embodied. I'm your host, Kaylin Rakowski, and thank you for joining me today for another deep dive and exploration into your inner world, into your body, the shadow realms, where we will begin to explore some of these esoteric principles and really begin to drop them down into modern day application and embodiment. This is a sacred place where you can begin to truly meet yourself, meet your medicine, and to meet your magic. This is a place of remembrance. Take a deep breath and let's begin. All right, welcome back, you guys, for another juicy episode of the Shadow Priestess Embodied. So today may be a little triggering. I'm just going to put a little trigger warning. This may be a little activating for some of you because I would say probably 99% of women are walking around with this identity or operating from this wounding and are completely unaware that this is even taking place. So, today, what I'm going to introduce you to and deep dive into is this wound of the good girl, is this identity of the good girl. And when I'm speaking of the good girl, I am talking about this part of you that deeply desires to be to be accepted, to be good, right? To be considered doing the right thing, etc. So I think you can kind of see like the underlying energetics of where this wounding comes from. And it's really ties back into the rise of the patriarchy, right? Like we talked about these different woundings in the past episode. So if you haven't had an opportunity to listen, I highly suggest you check that episode out before listening to this one. But the good girl really was this deep desire to be accepted from her community, right? That essentially women had to become martyrs, and it was our role to always be putting our children above us, always be putting our partners, our household, right? Our families, like everything always came before us. And God forbid if you were a woman who thought for herself or knew and embodied your sense of divinity and power, then you were instantly called a bitch, right? Like a woman who had boundaries, who put herself first, who took care of her needs, who filled her cup up, was always considered to be a bitch, or that there was something wrong with her. And it's like this heavy martyr energy that so many of us women are operating out of today, and have no idea that this patterning, this wounding is completely running the show. It is so deeply ingrained in our body and our subconscious that it's on our autopilot every single day, where, we constantly are putting others first, doing things to be liked, trying to do the quote unquote right thing, whatever the fuck that means. Okay. And really, when we're doing this, there also is a sense that we aren't really honoring ourselves, that we're betraying ourselves, that we aren't in alignment with our truth and what we really need. And I'm a firm believer that, by you doing what is best for you, it is always going to be in the highest alignment for all. And even if that seems counterintuitive in the moment, or even if you feel like it doesn't make sense, or, like I'm a mom and like I have to make my kids dinner by 5:30, or I have to da 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 da. But in the meantime, you haven't eaten, you haven't showered, and you're completely dysregulated. Okay. So really, when I'm talking about this good girl wounding, I'm really talking about the part of you that feels like you are not the lead in your life, that you do not come first, that you are not the absolute most important thing. And trust me, I have 3 kids. I am a partner. I am a daughter. I am a business owner. I have clients, right? So I get in our heads where we constantly operate from this martyr energy, from this good girl, you know, and feeling like we have to take care of everybody and everything outside of ourselves first. However, this really creates swamp ass boundaries for one, and the energetic exchange is so completely thrown off here that you will literally burn yourself into the ground. Okay, you will burn out, your business will burn out, you'll have a moment where you literally just explode because, you know, you can't keep just giving and giving and giving and filling up all these cups and doing for others when you yourself are not whole, when you yourself are not at a place where it's coming from pure overflow and love and generosity, and is not heavily anchored instead in expectations, attachments, like if I don't do this thing, then somebody won't love me. And I work with so many feminine essence clients, so many moms, coaches, whatever. And this is literally one of the biggest blocks that I see that keeps them from that next level of embodiment, of expression, of expansion. It is literally you holding on to this identity of being the good girl and wanting so deeply for everybody to like you and to put you on this pedestal and to agree with you and think you're doing the right thing. So, what I'm going to invite you into today is the other. Who would you be if you weren't the good girl? If you weren't trying to get your family's approval, if you weren't trying to make your partner love you, if you weren't trying to prove to everybody that you were a good mom, a good coach, a good CEO, a good business owner, insert whatever, who would you be? How would you show up? And I promise you that that expression, this otherness, is the key, is the doorway to unlocking everything that you desire. But it's first going to come from you completely dismantling this identity and your attachment to being good, to being the good girl. And I'll just tell you, like, this isn't easy. I'm saying it to you right now confidently, but I've gone through my own trials and tribulations of this, okay, where I wanted so badly to have friends and for people to like me and to accept me that I always dimmed myself down. I always made myself smaller. I essentially would fawn or be the people pleaser because I just wanted so badly for people to like me. And this really created this identity in me, or this experience where my whole entire life I have really felt like an outcast. I felt like the misfit. I felt like I've never truly fit in with any group of people, with any group of friends. And it was because I wasn't allowing myself to be all of me. I was operating from this good girl identity, which, fuck you guys, for probably 19, 20 years of my life, I was operating in a completely different identity role character than what is my soul's truth, than what is my authentic truth. And through the last 12 years now, I've had this complete dismantling of who I believed myself to be. And it's like by letting go of all these different parts of me, of who I believed myself to be, you know, who I was, what I liked, like personality traits, etc. It's like the more I could let go of these attachments or expectations from others, I allowed for more of who I am and who I came here to be to fully come online and to be expressed. But I could never meet those parts of myself by holding on so strongly to the identity of the good girl. And even now, I will say in my family, and even like in my partner's family, I feel like I am very different than most. Even people I meet, I notice that I think differently, I move differently, the things that I care about aren't common. And there was a time that I was so ashamed of it that I felt like I had to hide it. And I joke with some of my friends who've known me for a while, and I say I was like a closet spiritualist. I will say I've probably been an intuitive most of my life. I can remember imaginary friends, things as a little girl that now growing up and growing into my gifting were angels, were spirits that I was communicating with. And, then I unlocked these different quantum healing abilities. And I felt like I couldn't really be vocal about that. And even still to this day, when I talk about different priestess practices that I do, or, my rituals or different things, it's like there's still that level of, oh my gosh, like they're not going to like me. They're going to judge me. And the beautiful thing is that I can now feel this in my body. I can acknowledge that it's there and notice that, like, this is where this fear, this thought, this behavior is coming from, and then choose to honor my truth, choose to honor my authentic expression, and have my knees trembling and still share and be the light anyway. So I wanted to bring this to the table today because I think that so many women would be able to unlock that next level of success. Like I said, expression, whatever it is, the experience that you're really desiring to call in. But first, it's going to take you really looking at yourself and being radically honest with yourself, taking radical responsibility and asking yourself, which part of my identity have I created to be safe, to be the same, to be liked, to be accepted, to be good, to be right? And where can you begin to let go of these aspects of self, let go of these different ways of being, identities, ways that you're showing up, and really allow more of your authentic voice, your authentic expression to have the room and the space to come online and to be fully expressed? So I think it's important to really look at how you can begin to identify where you are operating out of the identity of the good girl or from this heavy people pleaser energy. Because to me, I really feel like they're one and the same. And most women who grew up with this good girl identity or operating from that place are now adults who experience high levels of stress and hypervigilance when faced with everyday situations. So, like disappointing somebody will trigger them, receiving compliments, setting boundaries, trying to just take care of themselves. And it's almost like these women who grew up with the patterning of the good girl, it's like there's this sense of being used or having to perform. And unless they're doing something, then they will not receive the love. They will not be liked. That's why so many women who carry this good girl energy are martyrs. They're heavy people pleasers because they believe that their love is contingent on what they do for others, not who they are being or how they're showing up in the world, right? Their value is contingent on what they do, or I'll even put it this way, what they don't do, right? Because when we're talking about being the good girl, it is about pleasing others, getting approval, over functioning, right? Over giving. And it's like this external approval means survival, means acceptance. Your basic sense of safety is linked to being liked by others, okay? And if you're putting all that energy outside of self, this is really going to set you up for low self esteem, poor boundaries, a deep sense of shame. So, in these dysfunctional families, the good girls are really praised for being invisible, staying quiet, and their willingness to tolerate poor treatment that completely, you know, goes past their own boundaries. And I feel like we can all see where this is really stemming from because if you are constantly rejected or even abandoned when you say no, or your desire for autonomy is shamed, then you would take on this belief that I have to be the good girl in order to survive. And I know as we're talking about the good girl that some of you may take this conversation lightly, but this is so layered and it is so deep and it is so deeply embedded in your subconscious, in your body, because the good girl wound is deeply attached to your ability to feel safe and the feeling that you're going to be able to survive. And if we're going to talk about this, it's also important to pull in the layer that, kind of like I said at the beginning, that this good girl wound really came from the rise of the patriarchy. The good girl wound is also very deeply in survival in a way that it is, how do I want to put this? That we are taught that survival involves performing for the male, and that the male's approval is absolutely necessary for you to survive. And really, if you think about this, it makes sense because, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, not that far back in history, women didn't have the right to vote, right? We couldn't go to school. We couldn't have bank accounts, right? Your role was the martyr. You were the one who cooked, you cleaned, you took care of the kids, and like that was it. You had no ability to like really have resources for yourself, right? So you have to understand that many good girls watched their mothers condone toxic male behavior. And whether this is through embodying it in themselves and going through this, or seeing your mother tolerated in men in the families, whether this was your dad, your grandfather, etc. We've really learned to internalize damaging beliefs like I could lose their approval if I don't give myself away, right? Or to be likable, I have to devalue myself and do what he wants me to do, be who he wants me to be. And I want to say too, it's not to shame our mothers, our grandmothers, right? It's not to shame them because at that time in their life, they did the best that they could and they did what they had to do to survive. But you have to see where today life is so different, and being the granddaughters, the daughters of these women, we are still carrying around these deep ancestral collective woundings of feeling like we have to be the good girl in order to be safe, when now we get to completely change the narrative, right? And this can be really hard when maybe you watched your mother having to depend on, the crumbs of approval from an ignorant man. We watched, older women tolerate abuse in silence. Maybe you're a woman who has tolerated abuse in silence, okay? Whether that be mental, emotional, physical. But we've endured as our mothers did and withdrew from our sense of self, from our sense of power, believing that the only way to be connected or to be loved is to be the good girl. And I want to completely change this narrative because you holding on so strongly to this identity or this wounding of the good girl is the thing that is blocking you from your fucking power and your absolute sovereignty. Okay. So, as women recovering from this good girl wound, it's important to see our unconscious complicity in being used and fiercely claim our self sovereignty. Like, that is the pathway. And I will just say, like, there is absolutely zero payoff or zero benefit in you being the people pleaser, in you being the good girl. And I think that so many people adapt to this way of being, like I said, because it's a deep collective wound, ancestral wound, etc. However, I also notice that what keeps a lot of my clients in this cycle and really keeps them from their fullest expression is this deep desire to be needed, to be liked, right? And I mean, a lot of people really love the absence of conflict, which I absolutely can understand, wanting those things. But it's also looking at like, if you are so deeply needing that validation where others like you or others need you for you to feel worthy or for you to feel powerful or insert blank, then the energy just isn't clean. And especially if you're somebody like me who you work and hold space, for clients in some capacity, if you yourself are not full, how can you hold space for others? Okay. You can't be approaching your clients from this need energy or from this get energy, trying to get the validation, to get the power, to get the worthiness from them. Because I promise you, the minute that a client doesn't give you that, let's just say, then it's going to completely fuck you up, because your sense of self, your sense of worthiness, your sense of power is contingent on something outside of yourself. And if something like that is contingent on something outside of you, then you are constantly going to be chasing something that you're never going to catch. And your own emotional state, your own inner world is always going to be in ups and downs depending on if you're getting the praise, the recognition, insert blank, that you feel like you need. Okay. So This is why really dismantling this whole good girl identity is the doorway into you being your fullest expression. You know, not desiring to be liked anymore or needing that has probably been one of the biggest things that has really liberated me and set me free. And today, I'm really inviting you to just begin drawing awareness to self, just beginning to look at yourself, look at your relationships, look at your romantic relationships, look at your business relationships, okay? And just start asking yourself, how many of my behaviors, ways of beings, the way I respond are coming from true, authentic expression versus fear of rejection or fear of not being liked or the fear of, God forbid, somebody calling you a bitch. It's like so many of my clients are like, well, then my clients are going to think I'm a bitch. I'm like, okay, and you have to realize that when you begin to set these boundaries, they may lead to some kind of backlash because, you know, you have people in your life who are used to you being and operating in a certain way. But your boundaries are never a personal attack on anyone. Okay. Your boundaries have absolutely nothing to do with anyone else. They are there for you, to protect you, to honor you. And the more that you can begin to approach your boundaries as a loving fence to, protect your peace, to protect your energy, it's like you begin to cultivate such a different relationship with them. And knowing that it's okay to say no. Like, my biggest advice for you today would be looking at in your life where you just can start saying no, where you feel like you say yes because you should, you have to, oh, I want to be nice, and where can you just start saying no? And you are not obligated to take responsibilities for others. You get to decide who has access to you. Okay. You get to decide what's right for you, what's not right for you, making your own choices. And you do not owe anybody an explanation for any of this. Okay. This is the most beautiful part. I see it so much in my clients where they want to start giving all these explanations as to why they said no. And it's like, no, no is a boundary. No is a loving fence. No is enough. Okay. And women feel like we have to always be explaining ourselves. You don't owe anybody any access or reasoning behind your choices and doing what's right for you. It's okay for people to be angry, okay? It's okay for people to be disappointed in you, okay? And it's going to be allowing yourself to really be seen in this way and to start letting other people down, which will create a different sanctuary in self. So let's bring this all together and tie a pretty little bow on it, okay? So you know that you carry the shadow or the wounding of the good girl. If you have this deep desire to be liked, to be accepted, where you notice you're always seeking outside approval or validation, and you deeply desire to please others, okay? And this typically manifests as high levels of stress when you feel like you have to disappoint someone, when you receive compliments, when you are put in a situation where you have to hold and honor a boundary or honor oneself. And it's almost like you've adapted this belief that I could lose their approval. I will lose their love if I don't literally give myself away, if I don't overgive, overperform. Or it's like, to be likable, I have to devalue myself. I have to shrink. I have to be smaller. Okay. It comes back to that kind of wound where you're too much or not enough. Okay. And it's almost like where their acceptance, their approval, and their love is contingent on what you do or what you're doing for them versus who you are and who you're being. Okay. And it's like this deep, deep fear of being rejected. Okay. And it's really coming from a place of survival. Kind of like I said, the good girl identity really stems from women, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, etc., when our basic survival was contingent on appeasing a man and doing what he wanted us to do, or we wouldn't have a home, right? We wouldn't have food, we wouldn't have resources. So this good girl wounding or this good girl identity is heavy anchored in survival. And that's what really keeps perpetuating the cycle through time and generations over and over and over again. And it's this wounding or our need to be needed or to be liked. And we devalue ourselves, or we overextend. We're the people pleaser because it's like we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to have any type of conflict in our lives. And this did serve women up to a certain point, but now today, life looks a lot different. So it's time to start looking at, where this wounding, where this good girl identity exists in your life, and where you are still perpetuating or living out of this role, out of this character, and really just beginning to ask yourself, is this in alignment? Okay. Because more times than not, what I see, it is this good girl persona. It is wanting to be liked and to be accepted so deeply that completely disconnects you from your essence, that completely disconnects you from your power, that completely disconnects you from your soul mission, from being, doing, and having everything that you came here to do. So I want to leave you guys with today just asking yourself, who would I be if I wasn't the good girl? Where in my life can I really begin to start saying no and solidifying the boundary to protect my energy, to protect my peace? And if this episode is really activating something in you and you're like, yeah, that's me, sis, then I would even push you a step further and take on the identity as the bitch. And I don't mean this by like go around and start cursing everybody out. Like, that's not what I mean by being the bitch. But to me, being the bitch is being a woman who completely honors herself, who honors her truth, who honors her authenticity, who puts herself, her needs before everyone else. And as a woman, as a mom, as a partner, I know some of you are literally fucking cringing as I say this, but really putting on the identity as the bitch and really prioritizing spiritual selfishness and knowing that as you take care of you, as you are the most full, vibrant, radiant version of yourself, that will begin to flood into your children, into your business, into your partner, into your families. And you literally get to elevate the experience or the relationships that everybody has with you by literally being the bitch and putting yourself first. It's really time to say goodbye to the good girl and fucking own your power, sis. If this episode activated something deep within you, a deep remembrance, and you're ready to ditch this good girl persona and to really meet your depths, meet your medicine, and meet your magic, I do have a few select spaces for one-on-one private mentorship coaching. And I approach this in a few different ways where some parts are talk coaching, some parts are somatic, some is energetic work, but we dive deep into your inner world, into the subconscious, into the shadows, where we can reactivate your own soul's remembrance and your own soul's coding for that unique spark of divinity that you and only you came here to be. And if you're someone like me who craves community, and to be around like-minded, witchy, woo-woo, powerful women like yourself, I am reopening the doors to my group program, Emergence, in August. Click the links in my show notes to apply to work with me and have an absolutely magical day. Thank you so much for joining me today for another juicy episode of Shadow Priestess Embodied. I absolutely love diving in and having these conversations with you all. If this is an episode that you found intriguing, that you found some nuggets in, please share it with a friend and be sure to subscribe and follow me so you can be present for all of the upcoming transmissions, activations, and downloads that I will be bringing to our community. Have an absolutely magical day, and I'll see you soon.